and welcome to episode 10 of Harvesting Our Wellbeing as Educators. I'm Maura O'Higgins. I'm a chaplain in a Dublin secondary school.
My name is Hugh Fitzmaurice and I'm a secondary school teacher in Dublin.
Hugh and I are going to share with you our reflections and experience of empathy in education. And in preparation for today, we've been looking at what empathy means on the ground as a foot soldier. What does empathy mean to us? What strikes me, Hugh, is that empathy is about me and the other and a connection. It is, of course, about loving myself and being connected to myself, and then expressing that same connection and self-love with somebody else. And I suppose for me, that begins with noticing how I am, and then being my authentic self and noticing how someone else is, and the desire to notice how somebody else is. So empathy for me, in my experience, it's not easy. It's not easy. It's a skill that I have worked on. It takes practice, and it takes articulation and re-articulation, because empathy, I used to think that empathy meant sympathy. Actually, I used to think it was sympathy. And I realized that it's more than sympathy. Sympathy is simpatico, an understanding of somebody else's pain, recognizing somebody else's pain. Empathy gets deeper. It's walking in their shoes, and it's more than that again. It is about that connection. During COVID, empathy is hard to practice, and self-love is what I default to, and noticing, simply noticing. And that for me always goes back to the breath. So that's a long-winded way of saying, for me, empathy is an evolving process. Hugh, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Maura. Absolutely. I think the connecting to our authentic selves is really important. I think that empathy, there's things that matter in school. Sorry, there's things that are important in school, and there's things that matter in schools. And I think empathy matters. I think it's the heartbeat of education. But as you said, it's not always easy because there's such a busy place. And I was looking at this quotation. Maya Angelou has said that I think we may all have empathy. We may not have enough courage to display it, because it often does take courage to display it. I thought, and as you said there, it begins with, so when it comes back to well-being of educators, empathy with ourselves. Where am I at? Am I angry? Am I annoyed? Is my head clear? Where am I at as an educator on this given day? And the awareness to come back to ourselves with the breath, as we talked about last week, the importance of the breath, that deep breath that you said there, breathing in, breathing out, slowing it down, come back to ourselves, and then seeing where we're at. And then from there, it's like putting the oxygen mask on ourselves first to get clarity, and then being able to connect. And that's a really important word, that connect with other people and see things from the point of view of other staff members, see things from the point of view of principals, of deputy principals, of year heads, of all the different members of the school, of parents. Not all at once, we can't do it, but we can spend a lot of our time complaining and criticizing and giving out, and it doesn't help. I think at times there's no harm in that. The odd time we all do it, it's part of human nature. But I think if we waste energy on it day after day, we're not going to move anywhere. It doesn't bring anywhere. It doesn't change things long term. But I think if there's that degree of stepping into someone else's shoes and having empathy for ourselves, and then having empathy for others, and reaching a compromise, or a sense of, or engaging with others, or listening to what they have to say, empathic listening, leaving our own beliefs or thoughts at the door, and just leaving our assumptions at the door, and then just listening to other people, and being said it before, having an open mind to that, a beginner's mind, the word you used before with John Kabat-Zinn, a beginner's mind, and which is really challenging to do. I think you need to be in a space to do that. There needs to be trust and a sense of calm, slowing it down. And as we often said, schools are all about, there's a fast pace to them, but creating that sense of reflection, quietness, and inner space can help create empathy, and can move things, can change things. Then as a result, when you start to see things from other perspectives, other angles, other point of view, it can really be quite, it can be energizing, and it can be illuminating. I know we were looking at a documentary in school a couple of weeks ago. Dia Khan is her name, this journalist, and she's a Muslim woman, and she wanted to find out the attitudes and belief systems of people like who were in the neo-Nazis, white supremacists, these people who would see her as the enemy. So she went out to find these people, neo-Nazis, white supremacists and all that, and she sat down and interviewed them. But the thing was, she had a beginner's mind. She kind of took away her own presumptions and her own assumptions, and she listened and engaged with them. She said it was quite terrifying at the start, quite terrifying. The more the listening, she listened, the more she engaged. They engaged with her, and the humanity started to be found underneath this radicalization, underneath this kind of sense of belonging to something extreme. The common humanity was found. And now, make a long story short, she said in one particular situation, months after one white supremacist in America who she'd interviewed, who she kept in contact with and almost became a friend, he left the organization. And he said, "You listened to me. We weren't shouting at each other. You listened to me, you engaged with me." So it's just on a human level, to that empathic listening, to see it from their point of view, see the hurt, see the fear, see the anger, and hopefully maybe help it dissipate. Now that's an extreme version, but in schools, with teachers, with management, with students, with parents, if there isn't empathy, we've got a problem. I think that's important, but it's to create the space for that, to be able to reach down, to be able to slow things down, I would say it, to hear others, to listen to others. That skill of listening is profoundly important, and it really matters.
It does, and our education system at second level does not provide the space for that. If it is there, it's a happy accident, and that's not good enough. Systematic change needs to happen in the same way that empathy is on a continuum. It's there with gratitude, it's there with patience, it's there with noticing, it's there with compassion. It's a continuum of creating connections, because that's what human beings can do and do well. But I think in the last 20 years, I think social media has unfortunately impacted on the capacity to create authentic connection, because authentic connection is messy, whereas social media is black and white, and there's very little nuance. Thich Nhat Hanh says that deep listening is about the desire to alleviate the suffering of others, of another. So when I practice empathy, it is out of a desire to alleviate your suffering, Hugh. Now, in the classroom or in the school, I'm going around and I see a teacher who has wrecked my head, wrecked another person's head, and I just feel like being short and impatient with that person, verging on unkind. it's very hard to remember Thich Nhat Hanh's words about the desire in me to relieve that person's suffering. But when I do it, when I notice how I am, when I notice another desire, which is to give them short shift, when I notice that and put that space between my reaction and my response, I'm the better person. And we, that person and myself, become more connected because I have cared about their desire, about alleviating their suffering. Here's two funny stories about Mother Teresa, and this can verge over into Mother Teresa Holy Joe territory, and that's not what it's about. Mother Teresa, a friend of mine went out to Calcutta, and before she went out, she rang the convent in Calcutta. This would have been 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and she got the time zones mixed up, and the phone was answered by somebody who got quite irate and said, "Don't dare ring here at this hour again, you've woken the whole house." It was Mother Teresa. And I love that because we all think of Mother Teresa as this wonderful, saintly, compassionate woman full of empathy. Another story, and a friend told me that story, and another story I read about Mother Teresa was that she was on a tour bus visiting places where they could expand or an orphanage facility in Calcutta. And she was full of zeal and zest and determination to get this. And the people on the tour bus stopped in a posh hotel for lunch, and she refused to go in. She said, no, 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 there are people starving on the street. I'm not going into a posh hotel. So she sat on the bus and they all went in and had a beautiful lunch. And they came out and one of them said to her, "You missed a lovely lunch." And she didn't respond because she had missed a lovely lunch.
Yeah.
So it's about that balance. It's about not being too zealous. It's about not being too overly kind. And it's the practice of living in the real world of school life and remembering that our empathy is about wishing to relieve the suffering of others, of another.
Yeah, and as you said, Moira, it's about like, how do we activate this? Like, it's a basic human need. We need to be listened to. If you feel listened to in a day, once in a day, whether it's a student, teacher, parent, principal, really listen to, it can be very powerful. Very powerful. But we need to create the space and time, the reflective space for that, and it can be done. That time, because this is something that matters, because it can make a difference to your day. Like, a sentence can make or break a person's day. How it's said to someone, but if it's empathetic and helping to alleviate their suffering, and we all go through ups and downs, that can be very powerful. And also what you said there, like, we can't be going around empathetic all day long because you'll be left drained and wrecked. There needs to be empathy for oneself, and there needs to be space when you do your own thing. But then when the space provides it, and obviously in the classrooms, and also if there is with colleagues, it can make a big difference. I definitely think like I'm doing this thing called Activating Social Empathy, created by Professor Pat Dolan and Dr. Ciara Boylan and their team down in NUI Galway. And it's all about activating empathy in young people and the skills of empathy and the difference between cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. And cognitive empathy is to see things from another person's perspective, but not to get emotionally involved. And emotional empathy is that emotional connection. And it talks about the difference between sympathy and empathy, and then it's a perspective taking, and this thing called the bystander effect, where we see something is happening that's not quite right, but because you're in a group of people, there's a fear of doing anything about it. That's the courage to stepping out from the herd and doing something, and I suppose in school we're seeing that there's a greater need for this, and it could take stepping out to say it, to make the space heard, make the space a real space, So you're encouraging young people to do something, to actively. It's social empathy for the community, for their school, for themselves. But I think I could do it myself as a teacher. You know what I mean? It's really important to put energy into that, like to do with staff members, to do with as I said, staff meetings, we you know, a staff meeting in our school, sometimes you can get annoyed about what's on the agenda because there's so much practicalities to get through. But maybe, you know, just, and again, this is only my own journey, I'm only talking from, is that space of, you know, the empathy about how people, we're going through a pandemic, you know, COVID, we're wearing masks. We talk about like body language. 95% of how we communicate is body language. And now we've masks on. So it's harder to read all that. You know, so it takes a greater time to make space for empathy. Put masks on, and we heard there last week, Joe Biden is all about empathy, you know, empathy for the people in America and this change. We'll see if it happens or not. And they were saying, like, there's a study done, like Gallup studies are doing the characteristics of leaders in the 21st century. And number one is listening, active empathetic listening, that ability to stop and listen, to serve others, you know. So I think it is, as you were saying there, I think it's for alleviating some sort of anxiety, and that's a form of suffering or disease in people, and helping put emotional money back in the bank for ourselves and for others. That helps in the learning. That helps in our outlook. It helps in our perspective to shift things. So I think it's invaluable, and it's definitely a topic, like so many of them, I'd like to come back to again. I think it's really, it can empower us. It makes it's how do we do it in a school? It's making that space, and it takes courage to stop and make that space. I think to reflect on these things. That is an area for management and for staff, for school, to make space for things like this. I think that would take, that's daring greatly. Brené Brown talks about that, making space for what matters, as I would see. But that's just my point of view, you know, on that and on my journey. But I think it really makes a difference, especially in these challenging times we're in.
You're right, and you call it active empathy, and John O'Donoghue talks about compassion being active empathy, because it's an active process. It's not passive. So maybe, Hugh, to finish up, will we actively pay attention to our breath for a moment?
We will, Maura. Sounds great. Thank you.
And
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Hugh.
Thank you, Maura. Thank you. And thank you for listening.